I've just come from Council on Foreign Relations talking about education, and I understand this talk is going to be free for all in the sense that I can talk about anything. so I'll try and do that. You saw the beginnings of the video, which showed you that how Brac was born, which with 10 million refugees in 1971 after the liberation of Bangladesh, trekking back home to their destroyed homes. And so Brac went into basically relief and rehabilitation in the immediate aftermath of war in response to the humanitarian situation in Bangladesh. So we started with relief and rehabilitation program. But then about a year later, when we finished in the 200 villages that we were working, building houses, setting up health centers, providing livelihood to agriculture, fisheries, livestock development and so on, creating people's livestock, getting artisans back into work, getting fishermen with boats and nets to get back to their own profession. So the challenge was what to do next. And we found that the people were so poor that we couldn't really walk away from them. We needed to basically commit ourselves to long-term development and poverty alleviation in that area. So that's how we started the Bangladesh Rural Advancement Committee and committed ourselves to long-term development of Bangladesh. So we started working with the entire village, poor and the rich, organizing the village communities, worked on agriculture, improving agricultural practices, getting one crop land to three crop land by providing irrigation facilities, sunk deep tube wells, got low lift pumps to provide irrigation. We started working in health and family planning. Family planning was another problem. Our growth rate at that time was 6 children per woman, and the growth of population in those days used to be 2.8%. And we had our GDP growth of about 3%. So per capita growth was very little. So we needed to work on fertility decline also. So we started family planning work and so on. So basically health and family planning, livelihood, agriculture, horticulture, fisheries, livestock development, and then water, sanitation, hygiene. So these are the areas that Brac started working in development. We found very early on, by 1975, we were quite convinced that if we worked on a community development mode, in other words, the entire village become our focus of attention, then the poorest people don't get as much from us as comparatively better off. Because those who had land, if their land suddenly become 3 crop land, is the landlord or landowner benefits more than landless people who work on their land. So we basically thought that to do poverty alleviation, we needed to focus our attention on the poorest half of the population. And then also we decided on another element of our program: who would be the change agent in our society? Is it women or men? And we decided that we would like to work with the poor women, because we thought that there is a better chance with women to be change agents in our society, particularly among the poor people. And so we started working on mobilizing women and providing them with building their sense of self-worth through conscientization and educational processes as we organize them for power. So this is how Brac's targeted approach to working with poor women started in around 1975. And then that model tended to work quite well in the sense that the poor people tend to get more benefit out of our programs. We started improving their wage rates, getting them more involved in Food for Works program when poor people were engaged in those days. And we wanted to ensure that the benefits from Food for Work program went directly to the poor and not through middlemen who would skim off part of the Food for Work resources. So this is how we went on expanding our program from one area to about 6 areas by the end of 1979. 1979 was the International Year of the Child, and we thought Brac was about 300 staff organization, not very big, small. What could Brac do as an organization to cut down infant and child mortality? Because that was the International Year of the Child, everybody was looking at how to improve child survival, and UNICEF led the way in terms of child survival revolution. They came out with a number of different activities that they promoted in each country that they worked in. So Brac also thought, we looked at our focus was Bangladesh, not the entire world, and we looked at our own statistics. 135 children out of 1,000 died before their first birthday. So infant mortality rate was 13.5%. The child mortality, under 5 mortality rate was 252 per 1,000. So that meant that quarter of our children died before their 5th birthday. So what could Brac do in a situation like that in Bangladesh? So we decided to take up one program to cut down infant mortality and child mortality. And we looked at diarrhea was the biggest killer in Bangladesh. And we thought that if we could teach one mother in every household how to make oral rehydration fluid at home with salt, sugar and water, we could probably cut down diarrheal mortality quite significantly. So with that in mind, we also looked at other things like if we immunized all children against 6 diseases, that also will have big impact in terms of mortality reduction. But then I went to see our president, and he said, well, immunization, I said I needed cold chain. I need refrigerators in every sub-district to maintain the cold chain. We needed that, and we needed the entire health infrastructure to be in place to be able to provide immunization to everybody, all children under 2. He said, well, we are going to electrify the entire all the sub-districts by 1985, then you can do it, but meanwhile do something else. So I decided that maybe this is not the right time to go for immunization as a big program, but go for oral rehydration. So that's why we started with oral rehydration. So basically the task was to go to every household in Bangladesh and teach a mother preferably, but one woman in every household, how to measure salt, sugar and water properly and administer it to children when they have diarrhea. So we decided that in 1979, we started this program in 30,000 households in the first year, and we had 200 staff. 200 new oral rehydration workers were hired, and we said you go to house and teach 7 points to remember: what is diarrhea, how it is caused, how diarrhea is transmitted, what is oral rehydration, how does it work in the body, what to feed during diarrhea, and in case the child is dying, what to do. So basically some messages, and also how to measure water and salt and sugar properly in a mixture so that rehydration happens in the body. So that was the task. So we did the first 30,000 households, and we fielded a group of monitors to check how many households who have been taught actually used oral rehydration when they had diarrhea in the household. We found only 6% of them used oral rehydration, and the other 94% didn't. So we were quite surprised why. Why we go from house to house, teach one-to-one, and people still don't do anything about it. No behavioral change, no oral rehydration. Then we found out that the teachers that we have, the oral rehydration workers themselves didn't believe in oral rehydration as an efficacious way of treating diarrhea. So once we found out that our teachers themselves didn't believe in it, so how would they transmit an information and a knowledge which is teachers don't believe themselves? So we brought them in, these 200 workers, into our Dhaka office, took them to the Center for Diarrheal Diseases Research, showed them how actually oral rehydration is administered and how it works in children, and then also taught them how theoretically glucose helps to transmit saline water through the stomach wall. So all this theoretical and practical training was given over a period of 7 days, and they were convinced. So once they were convinced, of course, the teaching improved dramatically, and then we fielded them again, and then each batch of our oral rehydration worker that we recruited, we brought them into Dhaka, took them to ICDTRB, trained them well, and then deployed them. So that's what we did. And then another 30,000 household was done, and we again fielded our monitors to find out what is the usage rate of oral rehydration. We found that it went up from 6 to 19%, 18 or 19%. Now, so we are not happy then. We said, what's the problem? There is something problem with our design. So we fielded a group of anthropologists to go and interview mothers who had diarrhea in the household but didn't use oral rehydration. And we found that in most cases, it was the men who poo-pooed the whole idea of oral rehydration. They said it wouldn't work. I'll go and buy pills from the pharmacy, and it won't work. So we decided that there was a design fault in our program. We didn't include the men at all. So we then decided that we needed to reach the men also in the village. So we started organizing meetings, or men's meetings. We went to mosques, we went to temples, we went to marketplaces. Wherever men congregated, our oral rehydration workers were talking with them how oral rehydration worked. So once we have done that, and then we started following it up with radio and television spots, and that also provided some amount of help in trying to get oral rehydration across to Bangladeshi population. And then of course it started shooting up to about 60-65%. So we were quite happy with that. 65% is not bad, in the sense that most diarrhea don't need oral rehydration. Some diarrhea, bad diarrheas need. So we found that most bad diarrhea, they were using oral rehydration. So this 25 to 30% who didn't use them were those diarrheas were self-limiting, probably is there for a day or two and then it doesn't. So it's not the bad type of diarrhea which kills people. So we found that large numbers of people was using oral rehydration. But then how was the quality of training? We were very concerned about measurement of salt, sugar and water. If it was too much salt, it could be dangerous to a child. If it is too little, it will be not effective. So we needed to have quality control. So we decided to pay our worker on the basis of quality of their work, how many points the mothers remembered after 6 weeks after they left these households, and how many, and whether or not they could make oral rehydration fluid correctly within the recommended range of salt and sugar concentration. So we had field laboratories throughout the country where our workers were working, and we will test 10% of the households and pay our workers on the basis of this 10%. So if a worker worked for 200 households during the month, we'll choose 20 of our households and send a monitor to test out how many points were remembered by the mothers. If it was less than 7 points, she got half the money. If it is less than 5, she got 1 taka. And if she got nothing if the oral rehydration fluid was not within the recommended range. So we paid our worker on the basis of retention of knowledge. So there was no salary. It was all paid on the basis of quality of the training that the mothers remembered. And I remember at one point a group of Indian Planning Commission members came to Bangladesh and looked at our program and went back to India and said that we would like to pay our health workers on the basis of quality of their work. So apparently it went up to the cabinet, the payment of workers on the basis of performance. So apparently Mr. Rajiv Gandhi, who was then Prime Minister, he said no civil servants anywhere in the world is paid on the basis of results. Why should we pick on the poor health workers in India to do that? So it was shot down. But anyway, so many people were quite enamored by the idea of paying people on the basis of results. But anyway, so this program went on till 1986, and we covered one half of the country, and the other half was remaining for the next 4 years. And that is the time when Jim Grant was going ahead with missionary zeal to try and get everybody to immunize every country. So I remember seeing Jim Grant, who was the head of UNICEF, in Warsaw in the 40th anniversary of UNICEF. And I said, Jim, you must convince my president to get into oral rehydration. He said, when do you want me to come? I said, come, go right now. So next month he went to Bangladesh, and he got our president to accept that we needed to immunize all our children. So once the president was behind us, so the entire health ministry was very keen to immunize children. So Brac was called, and they said, can you take up half the country and we will do the other half? So we said, fine. So this is how we went into not only the other half of the country, which we are going to do oral rehydration program, therapy, teaching, we also take up the program of mobilizing the country to receive immunization. So the half of the country that we took over to do not only oral rehydration teaching, but also immunization program, we found that at the end of 1989-90, WHO came in and checked on what is the coverage of immunization in Bangladesh. They found that in our 3 divisions, it was 82% coverage, and the other half, which was taken by the government, they reached about 62%. So it's not bad, but it was quite good. So the oral rehydration and immunization had a tremendous impact in terms of mortality reduction in Bangladesh. And then what happened also in a country like Bangladesh is that together with the mortality decline of children, fertility decline started also in tandem with that. So now what in 2005, 15 years after we completed oral rehydration program teaching mothers how, so we went into 13 million households and teach mothers one-to-one how to make oral rehydration fluid. And we also covered half the country with ourselves, and the other half was done by the government. So today, the infant mortality rate, under 1 mortality rate is 58, and under 5 mortality rate is 72. So it has declined substantially. But then this 58 mortality rate today, under 1 mortality rate, you find 38 of them happens in first 1 month of life. So in other words, more than half the mortality of under 1 mortality happens in first 1 month of life, and it's called neonatal mortality. And neonates, so when Bill and Melinda Gates visited Bangladesh, and I was very interested in developing a program for neonatal mortality reduction together with maternal mortality reduction. She immediately said, all right, we will fund you to do the cities. So Dhaka and Chittagong is now going through a funding through Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to reduce neonatal mortality and maternal mortality. And we have also got the other bilaterals. We have raised $114 million to do the entire country. The rural Bangladesh, the cities are taken over by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So hopefully, fertility decline has, we might as well give you some statistics on that. In 1975, used to be TFR, one woman used to produce, average woman used to produce 6 children. Now it's 2.8 children per family. So its decline has been quite fast, and hopefully in the next 10 years, we'll bring it down to 2.2, which is the replacement level fertility. Although Bangladesh's population is going to grow despite that for the next 40 years, and hopefully by 2060, we will have a population which is stable and will not rise, probably then start declining, as other societies have shown that the population actually declined below 2. So this is happening in health. Meanwhile, of course, we have been working in other areas of development, microfinance, agriculture, fisheries, livestock, education for children. All these are part of development and poverty alleviation program that we are involved in. In 1985, we decided that adult education is all right, but children, we don't need to wait for children to become adults to provide them adult education. We needed to provide them while they are children. So we looked at what Bangladesh was doing. We found that in 1985, it was only 62% of our children were enrolled in primary schools. Almost half of them dropped out before completing 5 years of primary education. So we decided to start a new program, non-formal primary education program, to basically not replace what the government was doing, but to supplement what they are doing. In other words, we wanted our government to take the responsibility for education, and so we decided that we would like to do one teacher schools and mop up children who are not going to school for one reason or another, either for poverty or gender bias, whatever keeps them away from school, we needed to get them. So we started one teacher schools in rural Bangladesh. Initially, we started with 22 schools, 10 schools within our project area, and 12 outside our project area. We wanted to find out whether Brac's project area, where we have got other programs, whether it has got any influence in the teaching learning in our schools. So we had the pilot program in outside and inside our project area, and we found that there's no difference at all in terms of quality of teaching learning in our primary schools, non-formal primary schools. So once we were satisfied that one teacher school, a teacher trained for 2 weeks and then continuously, progressively built up through refresher training and supportive supervision, could become quite good quality teachers. And so we decided to expand our program. So over the years, we have expanded to 35,000 one teacher schools. And then we found that we needed to help the government to also improve their curriculum, their quality, and reduce their dropout rate. And one of the problems of the government faced in providing quality education, and also we felt that many poor children, not having had any real help in the household, in their own homes, in teaching, in learning, because the parents themselves are illiterate. So when they come to school, this is for the first time that they learn to see a printed word, an alphabet, start counting and so on. So they haven't learned anything. So in class 1, they find it's very difficult with other children who have already had a head start with their own homes. So we decided to provide preschool education for a year for very children from poorest households, so that they go on to class 1, they survive. So we have now got 20,000 pre-primary schools, and most of these children who are going into our pre-primary schools are transitioning on to the government schools, and the idea is to get the poorest children to survive in government schools. So what we now have, things have improved over the years in Bangladesh. It used to be 60% enrollment, now it is about 85% of the children are enrolling, and about 20% are dropping out instead of 50% dropping out in 1970s. So the dropout rate has gone down a bit and enrollment has improved. But even then, out of 19 million children in this age group of 6 and 10, we have in the government schools, there are about 15 million children enrolled. Not all of them will stay, but some of them will drop out. But 4 million children never enrolls in government system. So these are the children that is our target group. Why? Because these are the children who will probably never go to school. So we start taking these children at the age of 8. Those who have not gone to school at the age of 8, we think that it's unlikely that they will go and enroll themselves after that. So these are the children, we take them. And then those who drop out from government primary schools without any meaningful learning, so we take them on. So ideally, Brac should have about 4 million children in our schools in order to get all the children of Bangladesh who are out of school. So I estimate about 4 million children are out of school right now, and we have taken about 1 million in primary schools. So basically, there are still 3 million children who needs to be mopped up and provided education. This is one area. Second area, the second area is quality of schools in rural Bangladesh. I mean, what is happening is that we provide education, but then children are not learning much. Even after 5 years of primary education, we find almost 20% of the children remain illiterate. So our education system obviously is not very efficient and not very effective. So we needed to improve primary school system. But then there has been some problems in terms of access to government primary schools, access to teachers. There is a problem that the teachers union in Bangladesh doesn't want to touch Brac, because they think that it's a kind of a back way into privatization of primary school system. It's now all public sector primary education. So that's one of the reasons why we have been facing in terms of providing support to government's primary education system. But recently we have got approval for providing teachers training to about 20 districts, and hopefully we will start improving primary education quality of the government system, because without that, just Brac doing 1 million children is not going to make a lot of difference in a country like Bangladesh, where children population is so large. We also looked at, we graduate about 300,000 children every year out of primary schools, and they go to high school. We find that very small percentage, less than 20%, actually finish 10 years of lower secondary schools. Rest of them drop out at various stages. So there must be some problems in terms of quality of teaching learning in these secondary schools. So we are now looking at how to improve secondary schools in Bangladesh, and we have taken out of 18,000 high schools in Bangladesh, we have taken 3,000 to try and improve quality of teaching learning through teachers training, headmasters training, school management systems, school management committee training. So all kinds of training and other inputs are going into these 3,000 high schools to improve quality of teaching learning. So once we have completed 3 years of support, we'll do an evaluation and see what kind of impact it had in terms of quality of teaching learning in these schools that we have taken. If it is successful, if it's done well, then I'm sure the donors would be very happy to expand our program to other high schools. So this is what we are now looking at, and we'll evaluate it once we have done 2 to 3 years of high school improvement program, once we have done that. Meanwhile, we have also gone into microfinance. We have expanded that from small program into, we now have 6.4 million group members who are savings, who are part of our savings and credit groups in rural Bangladesh. And this year, some 6 million borrowers will borrow $900 million from us in small loans. And historically, it has been a wonderful experience in terms of poor people's ability to be able to utilize these loans and repay these loans on time. Historically, from 1975 to now, our loan loss has been less than 2%. So 98% of the people have paid back their loans more or less on time and utilized them effectively. And it has had a great impact on poverty reduction in Bangladesh, not only in Brac, but also other entities like Grameen Bank is more famous in this country. They have done a great job too in terms of providing financial resources to poor people and giving them access to save and have access to resources. And this has also, microfinance, I know that in Bangladesh almost 19 million poor people, poor families have access to microfinance. So more or less we have covered all the poorer people have access to microfinance. But then not everybody is an entrepreneur. Not everybody can utilize their money effectively. So we have gone into looking at what kind of things Brac could do in order for poor people to have access to jobs, work, opportunities to invest their money in. I remember in 1990 we said that if we could plant 25 million mulberry trees, we could have 250,000 jobs created in rural Bangladesh. So through mulberry trees, mulberry leaves are fed to silkworms. And if you could give 100 trees to one woman, and she could become in a business in terms of silkworm rearer. And then there will be ancillary business for reelers and weavers and so on. So we could create about 300,000 jobs in silk. So we planted 25 million mulberry trees. How did we do that? We took lease of 13,000 kilometers of roadsides from local authority on 20-year lease. We started planting trees. So we had 11,000 women involved in planting trees and looking after these trees. And these 11,000 women were paid by the World Food Program with food rations that we negotiated with them. So we planted those trees, and we trained large numbers of women in silkworm rearing, weaving and reeling, and went into sericulture. But then in this program, all programs of Brac didn't work. This program didn't. I tell you why. One was, in 1998 we had a bad flood, and more than 60% of the country was underwater. So most of the mulberry plants, in fact we lost almost 90% of our mulberry plants during that flood. And as a result, many women who have been trained to do silkworm rearing, they went out of business. And the second, the reason I'm giving you that everything in development doesn't work very well. So this was a one that didn't work. The second problem was China. China was exporting silk into Bangladesh at a much lower price than we could produce silk. They were dumping. They wanted to get Bangladesh, India, and maybe Thailand and Vietnam out of silk, and they could then have the free for all. But anyway, China was not part of WTO, and we couldn't take a complaint to WTO that they were dumping. But anyway, so what has happened is that China has gone into WTO, they are no longer dumping, so the price of silk has gone up again. And so we are now replanting these trees again, not necessarily in the roadside verges which goes under water, but higher land. So we have taken higher land in lease, and we are planting those trees again. And probably again it will take another 5 to 7 years to plant all these trees and get all these women back into work. So that's what we are doing right now. Now, look at microfinance. As I said, that we have got 6 million borrowers, but then what happens? I know that there are 368,000 women who bought cows with our loans. And then we, of course, whenever somebody wants to buy a cow, we give a little bit of training about what to feed and so on. But also, I remember going into one village, in a remote village in north of Bangladesh, and found a woman who has bought a cow, but she told me that she can't sell her milk because there is no buyer in that village. And she was selling her milk at 7 taka a liter, when the price in Dhaka is 25 taka a liter. So I decided that I'll pick up her milk and bring it to Dhaka and then sell them at a higher price. So we went into a dairy business, collecting milk from about 85 locations in rural Bangladesh, where poor women who can't sell their milk can bring their milk into our chilling centers. So we chill that milk and then bring them into Dhaka to pasteurize and sell milk and yogurt and butter and all kinds of milk products. So Brac has gone into business to support poor people to get their employment and income up. So the woman who used to sell her milk at 7 taka, she now gets 21 taka. I'm buying it from her home. So all the businesses. So Brac is a conglomerate type of institution which does rural development, non-profit enterprise, but also for profits with a view to help poor people. So I remember that we decided that if everybody had 9 hen and 1 cock in their homes, they could get $10 income per month. So how about getting large numbers of women to get involved in poultry rearing, which is traditionally done in Bangladesh, and they could do it quite effectively without much problem. So we could provide hybrid chicks and cocks, and they could get, instead of 60 eggs per year for indigenous variety of hens, they could get 280 eggs a day. So we started importing hybrid varieties of hens, of chicken, and then we started providing day-old chicks to women. So we got nearly 15 million women producing 9 hens and 1 cock in their households, and get an additional income of $10 per household. So how do you do that? So we started getting into hybrid chicks, day-old chicks rearing, and then selling them to all these women who wanted to have an extra income. And then we trained in 70,000 villages, nearly 48,000 women in what is called poultry vaccination. We wanted to cut down mortality too. So we linked them with the livestock department, who would provide the vaccine, and these women will come and collect the vaccine, provide vaccination in their communities, and cut down mortality of hens and cocks within the village. Then they went into investing money into 9 hens and 1 cock, and then started getting more income out of that. So we started looking at, so then of course the next problem was feed. There's no poultry feed in Bangladesh, so we wanted to grow maize. So we imported 10 tons of maize seeds initially, gave them to farmers and said, if you grow maize, we'll buy all your maize if you can't sell them. We gave them a price. Nobody came back to us. Everybody could sell in the market at a higher price than we offered them. So the maize suddenly became a very useful way of some farmers who could earn some better income than rice and other things that they were growing. So the next thing for Brac to do was to bring 100 tons of seeds, not 10, next year. And the year after, we decided that we should have a joint venture with this silk producer, or the seed producer. So we went into an Australian joint venture with Brac, and we produce all the seeds, maize seeds in Bangladesh now. It's a joint venture between Australia and Bangladesh. We've also gone into rice, hybrid rice, joint venture with China to improve productivity of rice. So Bangladesh used to produce 15 tons of paddy per year in 1975. We now produce 40 tons of paddy per year with less land that we used to use in 1975. So we used about 8 million hectares to produce 40 million tons of rice. So our productivity has gone by about 2.5 times, but our population has grown by about twice. So per capita food availability in Bangladesh has grown, and barring problems of crop failure through floods and so on, Bangladesh is more or less self-sufficient in food. And hopefully we will continue in the upward trajectory in our agricultural production. So my talk was supposed to be how to scale up. We have scaled up in a fairly national sort of trying to solve a national problem. You can't really solve a national problem by remaining small and beautiful. You really have to remain big and significant, otherwise you can't really solve a national problem. And Bangladesh is maybe a small country, but it has got a large population. It has more than 145 million people now. So we need large scale programs in order to have an impact. So that's what we tried to do, and we are still continuing to look at avenues for improving productivity, improving education, improving quality, all these areas. So we have also, we have not only confined ourselves to primary schools and secondary schools, but also we've gone into university. So we have a Brac University, which provides undergraduate and postgraduate education. And some of the things that we didn't have a good public health institute. So we decided that graduate school, we needed to have expertise in public health. Doctors as healers are good, but you also need people who are looking at communities in terms of solutions to problems of health. So we have got a school of public health. We have got a school for educational development. We have got an Institute of Governance Studies. We are now training civil servants in better civil service performance through training. And we are also bringing out reports annually on governance in Bangladesh, state of Bangladesh's health, state of Bangladesh's education. So these are some of the things which feeds into policy and policy makers. So with all this, I don't think we have finished our work in Bangladesh. There's still long way to go. There are many areas that we haven't touched, and we need to work on many areas. And Bangladesh has not yet become a middle income country. It will probably take another 10 years, 10, 15 years to get to that level. But then we decided in 2001, when America sort of defeated the Taliban in Afghanistan, and there were 3 million refugees, Afghan refugees going back from Pakistan and Iran. We thought it's similar to what we experienced in 1972, 10 million refugees coming into Bangladesh. So we could probably do something about that in Afghanistan. So we sent a team of Brac staff to Afghanistan to start work in relief and rehabilitation, and maybe work on some of the things that we have done well in Bangladesh, microfinance, healthcare, and so on. So we now have a fairly successful program in Afghanistan. We work in 24 provinces out of 32. So, and we have nearly 4,000 staff in Afghanistan working in health, education, microfinance. We've got nearly 200,000 microfinance clients in Afghanistan, mostly women. Most of our workers in Afghanistan are women. And we are working on building community solidarity, providing irrigation for agriculture. In fact, the United States government was very keen that we go into areas where Afghanistan, they're growing poppy, and they're earning a lot of money from poppy. So some of us interviewed a dozen farmers, poppy farmers, and they said that, look, poppy is hugely profitable, and moreover, we are not taking these drugs, it's somebody else, so why should we bother? But then we also realize that it won't last very long, because somehow or other we know that our government doesn't like it, and ultimately we'll be out of it. So I tell you what we will do. If you give us irrigation, then we can do 2 crops, and then we'll get out of poppy. So that's what we are trying to do in some of the provinces where they're growing poppy all the time, trying to build irrigation systems. So last month, a Taliban group came to our Helmand office and thrown us out. All our Afghan staff was thrown out of our office. And then 3 days later, they brought us back. Why? Because all these irrigation channels that we are financing, they didn't get wages for the last 3 days when the Taliban was in office. And they started converging into our office and said, give us our wages. They didn't know these are Brac staff or Taliban. So these Talibans were accosted by all these people not getting their wages. So ultimately these Taliban said, all right, we go, you take over. So that's how our people are brought back into their office. So it's not, so we are trying to work on trying to get alternative crop other than poppy. We have, since tsunami, of course, and a couple of years ago, we went into some of the tsunami affected villages in Sri Lanka, and we are still there working with some of these victims, where we are loan grant funds has now gone into microfinance, and we have got around almost 40,000 borrowers who were affected by tsunami in Sri Lanka. And lately, in the last couple of years, last year in fact, 2006, we went into 3 countries in Africa, Tanzania, Uganda, and Southern Sudan. And we have started working in microfinance initially, but we are getting into agriculture, health, malaria eradication, tuberculosis program, and some of the things that, and agriculture. So basically, I think we will try to replicate most of the programs that we have learned something in Bangladesh, with minor adaptation which will be needed, particularly in education and also in agriculture, because topography and soil conditions are not the same as it is in Bangladesh. But then there are many lessons that Bangladesh will provide for Africa development, and we will but ultimately what is going to happen is that it's the Africans who have to change their own country, to develop their own country. So all we can do is provide support to them to develop their institutional capacity, their management in such a way that they ultimately come out of poverty. So that would be our long-term goal. So that's, I hope that one other thing that I wanted to say is that in order to scale up, what do you need? First need, of course, is resources, money. If you have developed a good program and if you have got donors who are ready to look at good programs, that they want to fund good programs, I found that raising money from donors, I probably haven't given even 1% of my time to that. So haven't given any time to raising donor money as such. But if a program quality is good, the donors tend to like that, and donors are also looking for good projects to fund. Secondly, you have to really develop, while you are scaling up, you need to first be effective, then efficient, and then you can expand. But in order to expand, you also need infrastructure. You have to develop training facilities, training trainers. You have to develop logistics, accounting, audits, management, all kinds of infrastructure, human infrastructure that is needed in order to scale up. So it's not just me desiring to scale up that is going to happen, but you need to also work at it in improving management, quality management, improving systems of supervision, monitoring, audit, all kinds of things to keep your organization transparent and accountable. And once you have been able to do that, then you can scale up and go national and international. Thank you very much.